The security scanner beeped 3 times, paused, then emitted a sound Zara Blackwood had never heard before in her 18 months of night shift cleaning. A deep, resonant alarm that seemed to vibrate through the concrete walls of Nexus Research Facility. The red light bathed her pale face as she stood frozen, her cleaning cart still clutched in her weathered hands, watching the screen flash words that made her blood turn to ice. Classified Level 9 clearance. Verified. Alert Administrator. Immediately. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Kyle Morrison, the facility's security supervisor, dropped his coffee mug. The ceramic shattered against the polished floor, sending dark liquid splashing across his pristine uniform boots, but he didn't notice. His eyes were locked on the scanner display, his mouth hanging open like a man witnessing the impossible. Behind him, 3 other security guards crowded around the monitor, their faces reflecting the same mixture of confusion and alarm. In 18 months of watching this quiet janitor come and go, scanning the same faded barcode tattoo on her wrist that looked like nothing more than some rebellious artwork from her college days, none of them had ever seen anything like this. "What the hell?" Morrison whispered, his voice barely audible over the facility's humming ventilation system. "That's not possible. Janitors don't have Level 9 clearance. Nobody has Level 9 clearance except..." He trailed off, his face paling, as the implications began to sink in. Level 9 was a classification that existed in whispered rumors and classified briefings, reserved for operatives whose very existence was considered state secrets. 3 years ago, Zara Blackwood had been someone entirely different. She'd been Agent Phoenix, the youngest operative ever inducted into the Ghost Protocol, an elite cybersecurity unit so classified that most government officials didn't know it existed. At 28, she'd already prevented 6 major cyber attacks against American infrastructure, her fingers dancing across keyboards with the precision of a concert pianist and the deadly efficiency of a surgeon. Her code name had been whispered in the same breath as legends, her digital fingerprints, the stuff of mythology among international hackers who knew better than to test American cyber defenses. Now at 31, she pushed a squeaky cleaning cart through the sterile corridors of Nexus Research Facility, invisible to everyone, except when they needed their trash emptied or their floors mopped. The transformation had been deliberate and complete. Gone were the sleek black tactical uniforms and high-tech command centers. In their place were faded coveralls 2 sizes too large, purchased from a thrift store in downtown Boulder Creek, and a baseball cap perpetually shadowed her face. Her once pristine blonde hair had been dyed a mousy brown and cut short, styled to add years to her appearance rather than enhance her natural beauty. The barcode tattoo on her inner wrist had been the finishing touch of her original cover identity. Designed to look like a piece of aesthetic body art, while actually containing layers of encrypted access codes. The thick black lines and precise spacing appeared random to casual observers, but embedded within the pattern was her biometric signature, clearance level, and activation codes for systems that most people would never know existed. It had been a masterpiece of covert engineering, allowing her to access any government facility in the world without carrying traditional identification that could be stolen, copied, or compromised. During her active years, the tattoo had been scanned hundreds of times at facilities from the Pentagon to underground bunkers beneath the Swiss Alps. Each scan had verified her identity and granted access to some of the most sensitive intelligence operations on the planet. Now it served as a daily reminder of everything she'd lost, everything she'd been forced to abandon when her former partner, Agent Codebreaker, had betrayed not just their mission, but everything they'd sworn to protect. Nexus Research Facility sat nestled in the Rocky Mountains outside Boulder Creek, Colorado, its brutalist concrete architecture designed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding cliffs and pine forests. To local residents, It was simply another government contractor working on renewable energy projects and environmental research. The reality was far more complex. Nexus served as a testing ground for advanced surveillance technologies, quantum computing applications, and digital warfare systems that would shape the next decade of international security. Zara had chosen this place carefully when she'd emerged from witness protection 18 months ago. The facility was large enough for her to remain anonymous among the workforce, but significant enough that her unique skills might eventually be needed. She'd calculated that sooner or later, some crisis would arise that the regular IT staff couldn't handle, and when that moment came, she'd be positioned to help without revealing her true identity. What she hadn't anticipated was how much the daily humiliation would wear away at her sense of self. Every morning at exactly 11:30 p.m., Zara arrived for her night shift through the employee entrance, a concrete corridor that smelled perpetually of industrial disinfectant and recycled air. She'd scan her civilian ID badge, submit to the standard security check, and receive her assignment from Tommy Reeves, the night supervisor who treated her with the kind of distant professionalism reserved for people you saw every day but never really noticed. Tommy was a decent man in his 50s who'd worked facility maintenance for over a decade, but even his kindness carried the unconscious condescension of someone who viewed her as fundamentally different from himself. The work itself was mind-numbing in its simplicity. Empty trash bins from laboratories where researchers developed technologies she could improve given 15 minutes and a decent computer. Mop floors in server rooms containing systems she'd helped design during her Ghost protocol days. Clean windows in conference rooms where contractors discussed cybersecurity vulnerabilities she could identify and patch in her sleep. Every task was a reminder of how far she'd fallen from the intellectual challenges that had once defined her existence. The other night shift workers treated her with varying degrees of indifference and casual cruelty. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maria Santos, who cleaned the administrative offices, occasionally shared stories about her grandchildren during their brief breaks. But most of the others viewed her as temporary, forgettable, someone who'd probably move on to another minimum wage job within a few months. They'd nicknamed her Barcode after noticing the tattoo, but the joke felt more dismissive than friendly, as if the marking somehow proved she was the type of person who made questionable decisions. The day shift employees were worse. Research scientists hurried past her in the corridors without making eye contact, their conversations falling silent whenever she appeared. Security guards like Morrison treated her as a potential threat by default, subjecting her to additional screenings and searches that went beyond standard protocols. Administrative staff spoke to her only when necessary, their tone carrying the particular condescension reserved for people they considered intellectually inferior. Dr. Elena Cross was one of the few people who seemed to see her as human. Cross led one of the quantum computing research teams and often worked late into the night, frequently encountering Zara during her cleaning rounds. Unlike the others, Cross would occasionally engage in conversation, asking about her background and expressing genuine curiosity about her opinions on the facility's work. These interactions were dangerous in their own way, as Cross possessed the kind of analytical mind that might eventually notice inconsistencies in Zara's carefully constructed persona. "You know," Cross had said one evening while Zara emptied the wastebaskets in her laboratory, "you ask remarkably insightful questions for someone with your educational background. Have you ever considered pursuing additional training in computer sciences?" Zara had deflected the question with practiced ease, claiming she'd picked up bits of technical knowledge from online tutorials and library books, but she'd noticed Cross studying her more carefully after that conversation, the researcher's eyes carrying the kind of analytical intensity that suggested she was solving a puzzle she couldn't quite articulate. The facility's security systems were state-of-the-art, incorporating biometric scanners, motion detectors, and artificial intelligence algorithms designed to identify potential threats before they could materialize. Zara recognized most of the technology from her Ghost Protocol days, noting improvements and upgrades that had been implemented since her time in active service. She could have bypassed any of these systems without breaking stride, but doing so would have exposed capabilities that needed to remain hidden. Instead, she submitted to the daily indignities of security protocols designed for people without her clearance level. Random bag searches that revealed nothing more threatening than sandwich containers and thermos bottles. Metal detector scans that occasionally triggered false alarms from the underwire in discount store brass. ID badge checks performed with the mechanical thoroughness of guards who viewed every civilian as a potential security risk. Kyle Morrison embodied everything Zara had come to despise about institutional authority without competence. At 35, he'd leveraged his uncle's senatorial connections to secure a position that should have required years of experience in security or law enforcement. His knowledge of actual cybersecurity was superficial at best, gleaned from training courses he'd completed with minimal effort and vendor presentations that emphasized flashy demonstrations over practical applications. Morrison's management style relied heavily on intimidation and bureaucratic authority. He delighted in conducting surprise inspections that served no real security purpose, but allowed him to demonstrate his power over facility staff. His particular target was the night shift cleaning crew, whom he viewed as the most likely source of security breaches, despite having no evidence to support this assumption. "You people need to understand," Morrison had announced during one of his impromptu briefings. "This facility handles classified materials. Every one of you is a potential liability. I'm watching all of you, all the time. One mistake, one suspicious action, and you're gone." Zara had sat in the back of the break room during that speech, her face maintaining the neutral expression she'd perfected over 18 months of concealment. Internally, she'd cataloged at least a dozen security vulnerabilities in Morrison's own procedures, noting how his paranoia about the cleaning staff had blinded him to actual threats from inadequate digital protocols and outdated access management systems. The irony was almost painful. Morrison spent his days worried about janitors stealing office supplies or taking unauthorized photographs, while the facility's actual cybersecurity remained vulnerable to attacks that Zara could see coming from miles away. She'd identified patterns in their network traffic that suggested ongoing penetration attempts from foreign intelligence services, noted suspicious email attachments that had somehow bypassed their filtering systems, and observed employee behavior that indicated possible social engineering attempts. But Agent Phoenix was dead, officially eliminated in a classified operation that had gone wrong 3 years ago. Zara Blackwood was just a night shift janitor with a barcode tattoo and a history of minimum wage employment. She had no credentials that would give her opinions weight, no authority that would make anyone listen to her warnings, no official existence that would allow her to act on the threats she could see developing. The Ghost Protocol had been disbanded. After Agent Codebreaker's betrayal, its remaining operatives scattered to conventional intelligence roles or civilian life depending on their level of exposure during the incident. Zara's case had been unique because she'd been the one to discover Codebreaker's treachery, making her both a valuable witness and a potential target for anyone seeking to complete the compromised operation. The official story classified her as killed in action during a cybersecurity operation in Eastern Europe. Her civilian identity had been permanently sealed, her personal history rewritten to support deep cover that was supposed to last indefinitely. The barcode tattoo remained active because deactivating it would have required acknowledgement that Agent Phoenix had survived, something that would have compromised ongoing investigations into the extent of Codebreaker's betrayal. So she cleaned floors and emptied trash, watching the facility's researchers and administrators go about their work with the blissful ignorance of people who believed their security was absolute. She observed vulnerabilities accumulating like hairline cracks in a dam, each one insignificant by itself, but collectively threatening the integrity of everything they were trying to protect. The night shift brought its own unique challenges. The facility never fully shut down, but the reduced staffing created security gaps that would have made her former colleagues nervous. Researchers working alone in laboratories with classified materials. Security guards stretched thin across multiple buildings. Computer systems running automated processes without proper monitoring. It was during these quiet hours that serious breaches were most likely to occur, when a determined adversary could exploit the reduced vigilance that came with routine and fatigue. Zara had developed her own informal patrol patterns, using her cleaning responsibilities to monitor areas that official security protocols might miss. She'd noted which doors were frequently left unlocked, which computer terminals remained logged in after hours, which researchers had habits that could be predicted and exploited. This information remained locked in her memory, useless without official channels to report it through, but valuable if circumstances ever changed. The facility's proximity to Boulder Creek provided additional security challenges that seemed to escape Morrison's attention. The small mountain town attracted tourists and outdoor enthusiasts year-round, creating a steady flow of strangers whose presence wouldn't automatically trigger suspicion. Foreign intelligence operatives could establish cover identities as hikers, photographers, or seasonal workers without generating the kind of attention they'd face in more urban environments. Zara had identified at least 3 individuals during her off-duty time in town who carried themselves with the kind of professional awareness that suggested intelligence training. They might have been American operatives conducting their own security assessments, but their presence indicated that Nexus Research Facility had attracted attention from people who understood its real significance. The weight of her hidden knowledge grew heavier with each passing month. She joined the Ghost Protocol to protect American interests and innocent civilians from threats they'd never see coming. Now she was watching those same threats develop, while trapped in an identity that rendered her warnings meaningless. The frustration was compounded by the daily humiliations of her cover, each dismissive interaction a reminder of how completely she'd been cut off from her purpose. But Agent Phoenix had been trained for situations exactly like this. Deep cover operations required patience, psychological resilience, and the ability to maintain false identities under extreme pressure. She'd spent months in hostile territory before, living among people who would have killed her instantly if they'd discovered her true purpose. The skills that had kept her alive in those environments now helped her endure the different, but equally challenging demands of civilian concealment. The barcode tattoo served as both her greatest vulnerability and her most powerful asset. Every scan created a digital record that could eventually be traced by people with sufficient clearance and determination. But it also provided definitive proof of her identity if circumstances ever required her to abandon her cover. The encrypted data embedded in those black lines contained enough information to verify not just who she was, but everything she'd accomplished during her years as Agent Phoenix. As she pushed her cleaning cart through the facility's corridors each night, Zara wondered how much longer this assignment would continue. The original plan had called for indefinite deep cover, while investigators dismantled the networks that Codebreaker had compromised. But 3 years had passed without contact from her handlers, leaving her uncertain whether the mission was ongoing or whether she'd been forgotten by people who had more pressing concerns than one operative's hidden sacrifice. The isolation was perhaps the hardest part. Agent Phoenix had operated at the highest levels of international intelligence, surrounded by colleagues who shared her commitment and understood the significance of their work. Zara Blackwood existed in a world where her most meaningful interaction might be a brief conversation with Tommy Reeves about which restrooms needed additional attention. The intellectual loneliness was profound, like being a concert pianist, forced to bang on tin cans while pretending to find it fulfilling. Yet she maintained her discipline, because that's what the mission required. Every night, she reported for duty with the same quiet professionalism that had characterized her covert operations. She performed her assigned tasks with competent efficiency, neither excelling enough to draw attention nor failing enough to justify termination. She cultivated the kind of professional invisibility that allowed her to observe everything while being noticed by no one. The facility hummed around her with the constant activity of important work being conducted by people who believed themselves secure. Research teams developed technologies that would reshape digital warfare. Engineers tested systems that would protect critical infrastructure from cyber attacks. Administrators coordinated projects that spanned multiple government agencies and international partnerships. And in the shadows, a ghost in janitor's coveralls continued her vigil, watching for threats that only she was trained to see, waiting for the moment when her hidden skills might once again serve the purpose for which she'd sacrificed everything else that mattered. Kyle Morrison's vendetta against the night shift cleaning crew intensified during the third week of October when Director Rachel Stone announced that Nexus Research Facility would be hosting a joint inspection by Department of Defense officials and international cybersecurity partners. The inspection was designed to evaluate the facility's readiness for expanded classified operations, which would bring additional funding and prestige to Morrison's security department. What should have been his greatest professional opportunity instead became the catalyst for increasingly paranoid and vindictive behavior. Morrison had spent his entire career avoiding situations where his competence might be seriously evaluated. His uncle's influence had secured him positions that offered impressive titles without corresponding responsibilities, allowing him to coast on bureaucratic authority while delegating actual work to subordinates. The upcoming inspection represented something he'd never faced before: scrutiny from people who understood security protocols well enough to recognize incompetence when they saw it. His response was to impose increasingly draconian measures on the people he viewed as most likely to embarrass him. The night shift cleaning staff became his primary target, subjected to new restrictions that served no real security purpose but demonstrated his authority to visiting officials. Zara found herself caught in a web of petty harassment designed to establish Morrison's dominance over every aspect of facility operations. The new protocols began with mandatory daily briefings, where Morrison would lecture the cleaning crew about security consciousness and professional deportment. These sessions took place in Conference Room C, a sterile space decorated with motivational posters about teamwork and excellence that felt increasingly ironic, given Morrison's management style. Zara sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs alongside Maria Santos, Tommy Reeves, and the other night shift workers, listening to Morrison recite security guidelines he'd obviously memorized from training manuals without understanding their practical applications. The upcoming inspection will determine this facility's future, Morrison announced during one particularly tedious briefing, his voice carrying the kind of forced authority that suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as his audience. Every employee, regardless of their position, represents Nexus Research Facility to these visitors. I will not tolerate any behavior that reflects poorly on this organization or my security department. His eyes lingered on Zara as he spoke, something she'd noticed happening more frequently over the past several weeks. There was a quality to his attention that went beyond routine suspicion, as if he'd identified her as a particular threat to his authority. She maintained the neutral expression that had become second nature, but internally she was cataloging the tells that suggested Morrison was building towards some kind of confrontation. The escalating harassment took multiple forms, each designed to establish Morrison's control while creating pretexts for more serious disciplinary action. Surprise locker inspections that required the cleaning staff to submit to searches of their personal belongings. Revised access protocols that required Additional badge scans and biometric verification for areas the cleaning crew had accessed freely for months. Extended background checks that seemed designed more to intimidate than to uncover actual security risks. Morrison's particular obsession with Zara's barcode tattoo became increasingly obvious as the inspection date approached. He'd taken to requiring additional scans whenever she entered sensitive areas, claiming that the tattoo's appearance suggested counterculture affiliations that might indicate security risks. Each scan produced the same routine clearance results, but Morrison seemed convinced that persistence would eventually reveal something incriminating. "That marking bothers me," he confided to his deputy, James Park, during a conversation Zara overheard while cleaning the security office. "People don't get tattoos like that unless they're trying to make some kind of statement." What kind of statement is she trying to make? What's she hiding? Park, a competent security professional who'd grown increasingly uncomfortable with Morrison's paranoid fixations, tried to redirect the conversation toward legitimate security concerns. "Sir, the background checks came back clean. Her employment history is documented, her references check out, and she's never had any incidents during her time here. Maybe we should focus on the actual vulnerabilities in our digital infrastructure that the inspection team might notice." But Morrison wasn't interested in actual security problems. Those would require technical knowledge he didn't possess and solutions that might expose his limitations. Harassing the cleaning staff was something he could do with the tools he understood. Bureaucratic authority and institutional hierarchy. It made him feel competent and in control, emotions that were increasingly rare as the inspection deadline approached. The harassment extended beyond official protocols into personal cruelty that Morrison seemed to enjoy for its own sake. He'd schedule mandatory overtime that interfered with the cleaning crew's second jobs, then criticize them for appearing tired during their regular shifts. He'd implement new uniform requirements that forced them to purchase additional clothing they couldn't afford, then conduct inspections that found violations in garments that met every stated specification. Zara endured these humiliations with the same disciplined patience that had sustained her through hostile interrogations in foreign countries. Each petty cruelty was cataloged and filed away in memory, not for revenge but for the psychological profile she was unconsciously building of Morrison's character and weaknesses. Her ghost protocol training had included extensive modules on reading people under stress, identifying the psychological levers that could be exploited when circumstances required. Morrison's behavior toward her specifically had evolved from routine suspicion into something approaching personal hatred. He'd begun timing her movements through the facility, appearing unexpectedly in areas where she was working and demanding explanations for her presence that went far beyond normal security protocols. His questions had grown increasingly hostile, delivered with the kind of barely contained aggression that suggested he was looking for any excuse to escalate their interactions. "You move differently than the others," he'd observed during one particularly uncomfortable encounter in the quantum computing laboratory. "Like you know exactly where you're going and why. Like you understand this place better than someone in your position should. How do you explain that?" Zara had deflected with the same humble deference she'd maintained for 18 months, claiming that she'd simply developed efficient cleaning routes through experience and observation. But Morrison's expression suggested he wasn't buying the explanation, his eyes narrowing with the kind of suspicion that indicated he'd decided she was guilty of something, even if he couldn't articulate what. The facility's other employees had begun to notice Morrison's increasingly erratic behavior, though their responses varied based on their positions and relationships with the security department. Research staff like Dr. Cross expressed concern about the impact on facility morale and operational efficiency. Administrative personnel worried about the potential for workplace harassment complaints that could complicate the upcoming inspection. Even some security guards were growing uncomfortable with Morrison's paranoid fixations and unreasonable demands. Tommy Reeves had attempted to intervene on behalf of his cleaning crew, requesting a meeting with Director Stone to discuss what he characterized as inappropriate workplace behavior by the security department. Stone had listened politely but taken no action, apparently viewing Morrison's excesses as an acceptable price for maintaining good relationships with his politically connected family. This response had demoralized the night shift workers and confirmed their growing suspicion that they had no protection from Morrison's increasingly vindictive management style. The breaking point came during the final week before the inspection, when Morrison announced new security protocols that seemed designed specifically to humiliate and intimidate the cleaning staff. Mandatory polygraph examinations for all personnel, with facility access. Daily drug testing conducted with deliberately intrusive procedures. Background investigations that would examine not just the employees, but their family members and personal associates. These measures are necessary to ensure the absolute security of this facility during the inspection period, Morrison explained during what he called an emergency security briefing. His voice carried a note of satisfaction that suggested he was enjoying the fear and resentment his announcement had generated among the cleaning crew. Zara listened to the new requirements with growing alarm, not because she feared the investigations, but because they represented a level of scrutiny that could potentially uncover traces of her classified background. The polygraph examination in particular posed risks that went beyond her ability to control. She'd been trained to defeat standard interrogation techniques, but polygraph technology had improved significantly since her Ghost Protocol days, and the questions Morrison might ask could touch on areas where her cover story had necessary gaps. The drug testing protocols Morrison outlined went far beyond industry standards, incorporating procedures that seemed designed more to humiliate than to detect actual substance abuse. The background investigations would delve into financial records, personal relationships, and family histories with a thoroughness that approached harassment. For the other cleaning crew members, these measures represented an unprecedented violation of their privacy and dignity. For Zara, they represented a potential exposure that could unravel everything she'd worked to protect. Morrison's announcement had another effect he probably hadn't anticipated. It united the night shift workers in a way that his previous harassment had failed to achieve. Maria Santos, typically a quiet woman who avoided confrontation, spoke up with unprecedented anger about the degrading nature of the new requirements. Other crew members expressed similar outrage, their voices carrying the kind of desperate courage that comes from having nothing left to lose. "This is illegal," declared Frank Chen, a part-time janitor who worked days at a local auto shop. "You can't just decide to violate our constitutional rights because you're paranoid about some inspection. I'm calling the union representative and filing a complaint with the Department of Labor." Morrison's face flushed with anger at this challenge to his authority. "Mr. Chen, you're welcome to pursue whatever legal remedies you think appropriate. However, I should remind you that employment at this facility is conditional on meeting all security requirements. If you're unwilling to comply with necessary protocols, you're free to seek employment elsewhere." The threat was clear and effective. None of the cleaning crew members had the financial resources to sustain prolonged legal battles against a government contractor with unlimited legal budgets. Most of them needed their jobs desperately enough to submit to almost any indignity Morrison might devise. The knowledge that they were trapped only increased their sense of helplessness and resentment. Dr. Cross had witnessed this exchange while working late in her laboratory, and her expression suggested she was troubled by what she'd observed. As the cleaning crew filed out of the conference room, she approached Zara with the kind of careful concern that indicated she was choosing her words deliberately. "This situation has become completely unreasonable," Cross said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Morrison is using his authority to abuse people who have no recourse. Someone needs to document what's happening here and report it to people with the authority to intervene. Zara appreciated Cross's concern, but she also recognized the danger in having allies who might ask questions her cover couldn't answer. "I appreciate your support, Dr. Cross, but people like us don't have much influence with management. They'll listen to Morrison because he represents security, and they'll ignore us because we're disposable." Cross studied her with the analytical intensity that had made Zara uncomfortable from their first interaction. "You know, in all our conversations, I've noticed that you speak with unusual precision about institutional dynamics and bureaucratic power structures. That's not typically something people learn from online tutorials and library books." The observation was dangerously perceptive, forcing Zara to deploy deflection techniques she'd hoped would never be necessary. "You pick up a lot about how organizations work when you've spent years being ignored by them. It's amazing how much you can learn about power when you have none yourself." But Cross wasn't satisfied with that explanation, her eyes reflecting the kind of intellectual curiosity that had made her a successful researcher. "There's something about you that doesn't quite fit the profile, Zara. The way you analyze situations, the vocabulary you use, the questions you ask about our work. Here, has anyone ever told you that you seem overqualified for your current position?" Before Zara could respond, Morrison's voice echoed down the corridor as he conducted his nightly patrol, his footsteps heavy and deliberate as he checked locks and verified security protocols. Cross quickly said goodnight and retreated to her laboratory, but the conversation had planted seeds of suspicion that could grow into serious problems if Morrison ever connected Cross's observations with his own paranoid theories about Zara's background. The final week before the inspection brought an escalation in Morrison's behavior that transcended harassment and approached genuine persecution. He'd assigned additional security guards to monitor the cleaning crew's activities, ostensibly for training purposes but actually to create an atmosphere of constant surveillance. Every movement was documented, every conversation recorded, every break timed to the minute. Zara found herself subjected to special attention that went far beyond even Morrison's previous excesses. Her cleaning cart was searched multiple times per shift, with guards examining every supply and tool for evidence of suspicious activity. Her routes through the facility were questioned and second-guessed, forcing her to provide detailed explanations for efficiency improvements that she'd developed through months of experience. The psychological pressure was deliberately designed to break down her composure and provoke some kind of reaction that Morrison could use to justify more serious disciplinary action. He was building a case based on manufactured evidence and distorted interpretations of normal behavior, laying groundwork for accusations that would allow him to terminate her employment and possibly pursue criminal charges. On Thursday evening, 2 days before the inspection, Morrison implemented what he called enhanced security protocols that required the cleaning crew to submit to full body searches before and after each shift. The procedures were conducted by external security contractors rather than facility guards, apparently to add legitimacy to what amounted to systematic humiliation. The searches were invasive, degrading, and completely unnecessary from any legitimate security perspective. Zara submitted to these violations with the same disciplined endurance that had sustained her through actual interrogations by hostile intelligence services. But each indignity chipped away at the psychological barriers that separated her civilian cover from her operational identity. Agent Phoenix had been trained to respond to threats with calculated violence when circumstances warranted. Maintaining Zara Blackwood's passive compliance required constant effort as Morrison's persecution intensified. The breaking point arrived Friday morning when Morrison announced that one member of the cleaning crew would be selected for enhanced interrogation as a final security measure before the inspection began. The selection would be made randomly, he claimed, though his eyes lingered on Zara as he spoke. The interrogation would include advanced polygraph procedures, chemical stress testing, and psychological evaluation techniques that went far beyond anything justified by normal security. Protocols. "This is completely illegal," Maria Santos protested, her voice shaking with fear and anger. "You can't just torture people because you're paranoid about your job performance." Morrison's response was swift and vicious. "Mrs. Santos, your employment at this facility is terminated immediately. Security will escort you from the premises within the hour. Anyone else who questions these protocols will face similar consequences." The threat silenced the remaining crew members, but it also crystallized something in Zara's mind that had been building for weeks. Morrison had crossed the line from harassment into genuine abuse, threatening innocent people who had no means of defending themselves. The situation had evolved beyond something she could endure passively while maintaining her cover. As the cleaning crew dispersed to begin what might be their final shift, Zara found herself calculating options with the kind of tactical precision that belonged to Agent Phoenix rather than a night janitor. Morrison's persecution had created a situation where her cover was likely to be blown regardless of her actions. The enhanced interrogation he was planning would almost certainly expose inconsistencies in her background that no amount of preparation could conceal. The choice was becoming clear: maintain her cover and allow Morrison to destroy innocent people along with her carefully constructed identity, or find a way to stop his abuse that might require revealing capabilities that would end her civilian existence forever. The decision would determine not just her own fate, but the safety of people who had shown her kindness during the darkest period of her life. As she began her cleaning rounds that evening, Zara was no longer thinking like a janitor trying to avoid attention. She was thinking like an intelligence operative assessing threats, identifying assets, and calculating the costs of different courses of action. The transformation was subtle but fundamental, a shift in perspective that would soon have consequences Morrison couldn't imagine. The facility hummed around her with its usual late-night activity, researchers and security personnel going about their routines, while unaware that everything was about to change. In less than 48 hours, the inspection would begin. Morrison would implement his final humiliation, and Zara Blackwood would face the choice between maintaining her cover and protecting the innocent people who had become her responsibility. The barcode tattoo on her wrist felt heavier than usual as she pushed her cleaning cart through the sterile corridors, its encrypted data containing proof of an identity that might soon need to emerge from the shadows. Morrison had created a situation where Agent Phoenix's skills might be the only thing standing between his victims and the systematic abuse he was planning. The ghost was preparing to become visible again, and Morrison had no idea what kind of force he was about to unleash through his own cruelty and incompetence. The crisis began at 3:47 a.m. on Saturday morning, when the facility's primary cybersecurity system suffered what appeared to be a catastrophic failure. Alarms shrieked through the corridors as emergency lighting bathed the concrete walls in pulsing red, and automated voice announcements declared a code orange security breach. Within minutes, the facility had locked down completely, sealing all entrances and activating protocols designed to contain potential data theft or sabotage. Zara was emptying trash bins in Laboratory 7 when the alarms started, her routine movements freezing as she recognized the specific pattern of alerts that indicated a serious cyber attack. Her ghost protocol training kicked in automatically, analyzing the sequence of system failures and identifying attack vectors that the facility's regular IT staff would need hours to recognize. What she saw made her blood run cold. This wasn't a random hacker probe or routine security test. Someone with advanced knowledge of Nexus Research Facility's infrastructure was conducting a sophisticated penetration designed to extract classified data during the inspection weekend when staffing would be minimal. The timing was perfect from an attacker's perspective. Most of the day shift personnel were home for the weekend, leaving only skeleton crews to monitor systems that normally required full teams to operate securely. The inspection team wasn't scheduled to arrive until Monday morning, creating a window where serious damage could occur without immediate detection by the high-level officials who would be evaluating the facility's security posture. Morrison's voice crackled over the facility's communication system, his words carrying a note of barely controlled panic that confirmed Zara's assessment of the situation's severity. All personnel report to designated emergency stations immediately. No one leaves the facility until this breach is contained and investigated. Security teams implement lockdown protocols and prepare for potential hostile action. The emergency procedures that followed revealed the fundamental weakness in Morrison's security approach. He'd spent months harassing cleaning staff and implementing pointless, bureaucratic measures while ignoring the actual vulnerabilities that a competent attacker could exploit. Now faced with a real crisis that required technical expertise rather than administrative authority, his limitations became glaringly obvious to everyone trapped inside the facility. Tommy Reeves gathered the night shift cleaning crew in the employee break room, his weathered face reflecting the confusion and fear that had gripped the facility's support staff. "Nobody knows what's happening," he admitted, his voice heavy, with the resignation of someone who'd learned not to expect clear communication from management during emergencies. "Morrison's running around shouting orders, but the IT people are telling him they can't stop whatever's attacking our systems." Frank Chun, still angry about the humiliating security protocols Morrison had announced, expressed what the others were thinking. "This is what happens when you put an incompetent political appointee in charge of security. He spends all his time harassing janitors instead of protecting the facility from actual threats." Zara listened to their conversation, while internally calculating the scope of the attack she'd observed. The intrusion had targeted 3 specific systems: the classified project database, the personnel records server, and the communication network that connected Nexus to other government facilities. This wasn't random data theft, but a carefully planned operation designed to extract specific intelligence, while compromising the facility's ability to coordinate a response. Through the break room's small window, she could see Morrison pacing frantically in the security office, his gestures becoming increasingly erratic as he tried to manage a crisis that exceeded his competence. Dr. Cross and several other researchers had been summoned to assist with damage assessment, their faces reflecting the professional alarm of people who understood the implications of compromised classified systems. The facility's IT director, a competent professional named David Walsh, appeared on the communication system to provide the first coherent assessment of the situation. His voice carried the controlled urgency of someone dealing with a technical emergency that had escalated beyond normal parameters. "We're experiencing a coordinated cyber attack that has penetrated multiple critical systems. The attackers appear to have advanced knowledge of our infrastructure and security protocols. We need all available technical personnel to assist with containment and recovery efforts." Walsh's announcement confirmed what Zara had already concluded. Someone with inside knowledge was conducting this attack. The penetration showed familiarity with Nexus's specific vulnerabilities and defensive measures, suggesting either a former employee with classified access or an intelligence operation that had spent months mapping the facility's digital architecture. Morrison's response to this assessment revealed the depth of his paranoia and incompetence. Instead of supporting Walsh's technical efforts, he seized on the reference to inside knowledge as validation of his conspiracy theories about the cleaning staff. Within minutes, he'd ordered additional security guards to monitor all support personnel, treating them as suspects rather than potential assets in the facility's defense. "The attack vector came from inside the facility," Morrison announced over the intercom, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who believed his prejudices had been vindicated. "We're implementing enhanced interrogation protocols for all personnel who had access to critical areas during the past 48 hours. No one leaves until we identify the source of this breach." The enhanced interrogation protocols Morrison referenced were the same abusive procedures he'd threatened earlier, now deployed under the cover of emergency authority that eliminated normal oversight and legal protections. Zara realized that he was using the crisis as an opportunity to implement the systematic harassment he'd been planning, with the cyber attack providing justification for measures that would have been illegal under normal circumstances. Dr. Cross appeared in the doorway of the break room, her expression reflecting a mixture of professional concern and personal outrage. "This is insane," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure Morrison's security guards weren't within hearing range. "Walsh needs technical assistance to stop this attack, but Morrison is treating everyone like criminals instead of helping with the actual emergency." The situation deteriorated rapidly as Morrison's paranoid response interfered with legitimate security efforts. Technical personnel who should have been analyzing the attack were instead subjected to interrogations that consumed valuable time and resources. Communication between departments broke down as Morrison insisted that all coordination go through his security office, creating bottlenecks that slowed the response to the ongoing breach. Zara watched this unfold with growing alarm, recognizing patterns from her ghost protocol training that indicated the attack was escalating while the facility's defenses remained compromised. The attackers were using Morrison's dysfunctional response to extend their access and extract additional data, turning his incompetence into an operational advantage that multiplied the damage they could inflict. By 5:30 a.m., the situation had reached a breaking point. Walsh's technical team had identified the attack vectors but couldn't implement countermeasures because Morrison had locked down access to critical systems pending completion of his interrogations. The attackers were using this delay to penetrate deeper into the facility's network, accessing classified databases that should have been isolated from external threats. Morrison's solution was to implement the random selection process he'd threatened for enhanced interrogation, though his choice was anything but random. Zara had expected to be selected, but the announcement still sent a chill through her when Morrison's voice echoed through the break room's speakers. "Zara Blackwood, report to Security Office Alpha for immediate enhanced questioning. This is a mandatory security protocol. Failure to comply will result in additional charges." The other cleaning crew members looked at her with expressions ranging from sympathy to relief that they hadn't been chosen. Tommy Reeves started to protest the selection, but Zara cut him off with a gesture that she hoped conveyed calm acceptance rather than the tactical calculation that was actually driving her response. "It's okay, Tommy," she said quietly. "Let me handle this. Maybe if I cooperate, Morrison will leave the rest of you alone." But as she walked through the facility's corridors toward Morrison's office, Zara was no longer thinking like a cooperative civilian employee. The combination of the ongoing cyber attack and Morrison's abusive escalation had created a situation where her cover was likely to be blown regardless of her actions. The enhanced interrogation would almost certainly expose inconsistencies in her background that couldn't be explained away, while the facility's compromised systems remained vulnerable to attackers who were exploiting Morrison's paranoid response. The security office had been transformed into an improvised interrogation facility, complete with recording equipment, stress monitoring devices, and the kind of harsh lighting designed to increase psychological pressure on subjects. Morrison stood behind a metal desk with the satisfied expression of someone who believed he was finally in control of the situation, flanked by two external security contractors whose presence suggested he'd been planning this confrontation for days. "Ms. Blackwood," Morrison began, his voice carrying the formal tone of someone conducting official business, "you are suspected of providing assistance to hostile forces attempting to compromise this facility's security. These proceedings are being recorded for official review and potential criminal prosecution." The charges were baseless, but Zara recognized that Morrison didn't need evidence to destroy her civilian identity. The interrogation process itself would reveal enough inconsistencies to justify whatever action he wanted to take, while the ongoing cyber attack provided cover for procedures that would normally require legal oversight. "I understand you believe I'm involved in whatever's happening to your computer systems," she replied, maintaining the deferential tone that had characterized her interactions with Morrison for 18 months. "I'm willing to cooperate fully with your investigation, but I want to point out that this facility is still under attack while you're questioning janitors." Morrison's face flushed with anger at what he interpreted as criticism of his priorities. "Ms. Blackwood, you are in no position to question security protocols or suggest alternative approaches. Your role is to answer questions truthfully and provide information that will help us identify the source of this breach." The first phase of questioning focused on her background and employment history, areas where her cover story had been carefully constructed to withstand routine investigation. But the stress monitoring equipment Morrison was using was more sophisticated than she'd expected, incorporating biometric analysis that could detect physiological responses indicating deception or emotional stress. "According to your employment application, you worked as a cashier at a grocery store in Denver before coming here," Morrison said, studying readings from the monitoring equipment with the intensity of someone who believed he was close to a breakthrough. "Yet our background investigation found no record of employment at that location during the period you specified." The discrepancy was one of several deliberate gaps in her cover story, designed to appear like normal employment history errors rather than indicators of classified background. But Morrison was interpreting these inconsistencies as evidence of deception, building a case based on conclusions that were technically correct, but completely wrong about their implications. "I may have gotten the dates wrong," Zara replied, allowing a note of nervous uncertainty to enter her voice. "It was a few years ago, and I worked several part-time jobs around that time. It's possible I confused the timeline when I filled out the application." But the stress monitors were indicating that her physiological responses didn't match the nervous uncertainty she was projecting vocally. Morrison's expression grew more satisfied as he observed these readings, convinced that he was detecting deception that proved his theories about her involvement in the cyber attack. The questioning continued for over an hour, covering every aspect of her background and employment history with a thoroughness that revealed how much investigation Morrison had conducted during his harassment campaign. Some of his questions touched on areas where her cover story had unavoidable gaps, forcing her to deploy deflection techniques that only increased the stress readings he was monitoring. Meanwhile, the cyber attack was continuing to escalate. Every few minutes, automated announcements would report additional system compromises, but Morrison seemed completely focused on his interrogation rather than the ongoing emergency. His obsession with proving her guilt had blinded him to the actual threats facing the facility. Dr. Cross appeared in the security office doorway during a break in the questioning, her expression reflecting urgent concern about the deteriorating situation. "Morrison, Walsh needs immediate access to the communication systems to coordinate with external security agencies. The attack has spread to connected facilities, and we're losing containment." Morrison's response revealed the extent to which his paranoid fixation had distorted his judgment. "Dr. Cross, this interrogation has priority until we identify the insider who provided access to these systems. Ms. Blackwood's stress responses indicate deception, and her background contains multiple inconsistencies that suggest falsified identity documents." Cross stared at him with the expression of someone witnessing professional incompetence that bordered on sabotage. "You're seriously suggesting that a night shift janitor is masterminding a sophisticated cyber attack against classified government systems? While you're pursuing this fantasy, real attackers are stealing actual classified data." The confrontation between Cross and Morrison crystallized the choice that Zara had been avoiding since the crisis began. Morrison's interrogation was going to expose her identity regardless of her cooperation, while his dysfunctional response was allowing serious damage to continue. The facility needed someone with her expertise to counter the attack, but revealing her capabilities would end her civilian cover permanently. As Morrison and Cross argued about priorities, Zara made the calculation that would define everything that followed. The mission that had sent her into deep cover was to protect American interests from threats exactly like this cyber attack. Maintaining her civilian identity, while allowing classified systems to be compromised, violated the fundamental purpose for which she'd sacrificed everything else that mattered. The decision, when it came, felt like stepping off a cliff into an unknown future. Agent Phoenix had been declared dead 3 years ago, but the skills and training that defined her had never disappeared. Morrison had created a situation where those skills were the only thing that could save the facility and the innocent people trapped inside it. As Morrison prepared to resume his interrogation with more invasive procedures, Zara stood up from the metal chair with a movement that carried none of the submissive compliance she'd displayed for 18 months. Her posture shifted subtly, reflecting the tactical awareness and professional confidence that belonged to someone entirely different from the woman Morrison thought he was questioning. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice carrying an authority that had commanded elite cyber warfare units in the highest levels of government service, "you have approximately 12 minutes before the attackers complete their penetration of the classified weapons research database. After that, they'll have access to information that could compromise national security for decades. Are you going to continue this amateur interrogation, or are you going to let me stop them?" The transformation was subtle but unmistakable, like watching a mask fall away to reveal something that had been hidden underneath. Morrison stared at her with the expression of someone whose world had just shifted in ways he couldn't comprehend, while Cross stepped forward with the kind of professional recognition that comes from identifying expertise in an unexpected context. The barcode tattoo on Zara's wrist seemed to pulse with significance as she waited for Morrison's response, its encrypted data containing proof of an identity that was about to emerge from 3 years of carefully maintained invisibility. The ghost was about to become visible again, and nothing would ever be the same. Morrison's laugh was harsh and disbelieving, the sound of someone whose paranoid worldview was being challenged in ways he couldn't process. "You expect me to believe that a janitor with a fake background and suspicious tattoo is going to save US from a cyber attack? This is exactly the kind of delusional behavior I expected from someone involved in this conspiracy." But Dr. Cross was studying Zara with the analytical intensity that had made her a successful researcher, noting details that Morrison's preconceptions prevented him from seeing. The way Zara had assessed the tactical situation with professional precision, the casual authority in her voice when discussing classified systems, the unconscious shift in posture that suggested military or intelligence training far beyond anything a civilian maintenance worker should possess. "Morrison, listen to her," Cross said urgently. "Look at how she's analyzing this situation. She understands the attack vectors better than our IT staff. Whatever her background really is, she knows what she's talking about." Morrison's response revealed the depth of his investment in his conspiracy theories. Rather than considering that he might be wrong about Zara's identity, he expanded his paranoid framework to include Cross as a potential collaborator. "Dr. Cross, your defense of this suspect is noted and will be included in my report. I'm beginning to question whether you might have provided her with classified information that she's now using to appear knowledgeable." The accusation against Cross was so absurd that it crystallized the reality of Morrison's mental state for everyone present. His paranoid fixation had evolved beyond rational suspicion into genuine delusion, creating interpretations of evidence that bore no relationship to observable facts. The cyber attack, Zara's background inconsistencies, and Cross's professional competence were all being filtered through a worldview that saw conspiracies everywhere except in his own failures. Zara made her choice in that moment, recognizing that Morrison's delusions would prevent any rational response to the crisis, regardless of how she handled the situation. The facility needed immediate technical intervention from someone with her capabilities, and Morrison's interrogation was consuming time that the attackers were using to penetrate deeper into classified systems. "Mr. Morrison," she said, voice carrying the kind of calm authority that comes from years of command experience in high-stakes situations, "I'm going to walk over to that computer terminal and stop this attack. You can continue your interrogation afterward, or you can assist with damage assessment. But I'm not going to sit here while classified data is stolen, because you're more interested in proving conspiracy theories than protecting national security." The statement was delivered with such matter-of-fact confidence that Morrison momentarily faltered, his certainty wavering in the face of someone who clearly possessed expertise he couldn't comprehend. But his paranoid framework quickly reasserted itself, providing explanations that preserved his sense of control and authority. "Security, restrain the suspect," Morrison ordered the two contractors flanking his desk. "She's attempting to gain access to classified systems under the cover of assisting with the emergency. This is exactly the behavior pattern I predicted from a hostile operative." The contractors moved toward Zara with professional efficiency. Their training focused on controlling non-compliant subjects during interrogations. But as they reached for her arms, something happened that none of them expected. Zara's response wasn't the panicked resistance of a frightened civilian, or even the calculated defiance of someone with basic self-defense training. Her movements carried the fluid precision of someone whose combat skills had been honed in actual life-or-death situations. The first contractor found his grabbing motion redirected into a joint lock that left him face down on the floor with his arm twisted behind his back in a position that threatened permanent damage if he struggled. The second contractor reached for his taser, but Zara's hand was already moving, striking nerve clusters with surgical precision that left him conscious but temporarily paralyzed. The entire sequence took less than 4 seconds and was executed with a level of skill that made it clear this wasn't lucky improvisation, but professional expertise. Morrison stared at the scene with the expression of someone whose reality had just been completely overturned. The quiet janitor he'd been tormenting for months had just neutralized 2 trained security contractors with movements that belonged in classified training manuals rather than civilian self-defense courses. His conspiracy theories suddenly seemed less like paranoid delusions and more like incomplete recognition of something far more significant than he'd imagined. "What are you?" Morrison whispered, his voice carrying a note of genuine fear for the first time since the crisis had begun. Zara straightened from her defensive stance, her professional composure intact despite the violence she'd just employed. "I'm someone who needs to stop this attack before it causes damage that can't be repaired. Dr. Cross, can you get me administrative access to the main server? I'll need root privileges and direct network interface." Cross moved toward the computer terminal with the urgency of someone who'd recognized that the situation had transcended normal protocols. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she bypassed standard security measures, using emergency overrides that granted the kind of system access normally reserved for critical maintenance operations. "I'm logging you in with my credentials," Cross sighed, stepping aside to give Zara access to the workstation. "But I want to know who you really are and how you know so much about our classified systems." Zara's hands moved over the keyboard with the same fluid precision she'd displayed during the physical confrontation, her fingers finding command sequences and system pathways with the unconscious familiarity of someone who'd designed similar architectures. Within seconds, she'd accessed diagnostic interfaces that revealed the full scope of the ongoing attack, mapping intrusion vectors and identifying compromised systems with a speed that would have impressed professional cybersecurity experts. "The attack is more sophisticated than your IT team realized," she said, her voice carrying the clinical tone of someone delivering a technical briefing. "They're using a combination of social engineering, zero-day exploits, and insider knowledge to maintain persistent access while extracting specific classified data. The good news is that they haven't penetrated the most sensitive systems yet. The bad news is that they will, unless we implement countermeasures immediately." Morrison watched this display of expertise with growing alarm, his paranoid theories shifting to accommodate evidence that suggested Zara possessed capabilities far beyond anything he'd imagined. But rather than questioning his fundamental assumptions about her motives, he doubled down on conspiracy explanations that preserved his sense of moral authority. "She's demonstrating knowledge that proves her involvement in the attack," Morrison declared, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "No civilian maintenance worker could understand these systems well enough to navigate them so efficiently." Dr. Cross had stopped listening to Morrison's protests. Her attention was now fully on Zara, who was operating the computer systems with a level of speed and skill that clearly surpassed standard IT support. On screen, security measures were being rewritten in real-time, firewalls rebuilt, protocols resecured, intrusion systems reactivated, all executed with a fluency that revealed both deep knowledge of cyber offense and elite defensive strategy. Cross leaned in, murmuring in disbelief. "You're not just stopping the breach, you're tracing the origin, isolating their control network, and launching countermeasures. This is Black Ops-level cybersecurity." Still focused on the terminal, Zara replied calmly, "Dr. Cross, I need you to contact David Walsh and have him install the security package I'm uploading to the mainframe. Tell him the code structure is based on classified defense models. He'll recognize the signature." The term classified visibly unsettled Morrison, feeding his paranoia, but before he could react, the facility's comms system crackled with a voice that silenced the room. It was Director Rachel Stone, but her usual administrative calm had been replaced by urgency. "Security Office Alpha, this is a priority transmission from the Department of Defense. Agent Marcus Vale is en route with a special response team to assist with the cyber attack. All personnel are instructed to cooperate fully with federal investigators." Morrison went pale. He knew what federal involvement meant: oversight, higher clearance levels, real accountability, and worse, scrutiny. His questionable handling of the situation, and particularly his interrogation of Zara, might now be considered interference in a federal operation. 20 minutes later, helicopters touched down on the facility's emergency landing pad. Tactical boots hit the ground in synchronized formation, securing the building with swift precision. Then came Agent Marcus Vale. He entered the security office like a man used to being in charge. Early 40s, sharp and physically capable, he wore a tailored gray suit that barely concealed the armor beneath. His eyes were alert, trained to read a room before danger could announce itself. When his gaze landed on Zara, still seated at the console, his entire demeanor shifted. "Agent Phoenix," he said quietly, with a mixture of relief and something close to admiration. "We've been trying to find you for 3 years." The words struck Morrison like a blow to the chest. His theories, however wild, hadn't even scratched the surface. Zara wasn't just a technician with a murky past. She was a deep-cover federal agent, her identity so protected that even he'd never had clearance to know she existed. Zara didn't move. Her hands stayed on the keyboard, her posture composed, but her eyes locked on Vale with a caution that suggested a shared history more complicated than protocol. "Agent Vale," she replied evenly. "I'm managing a live cyber attack on this facility. The breach is controlled, but not neutralized. We can address my status once the threat is fully contained." Vale nodded without hesitation. "Understood. What's your current assessment?" What followed was a rapid, technically dense exchange in the clipped language of career operatives, references to threat signatures, vector analysis, and layered intrusion points that flew far above civilian comprehension. Morrison listened, in stunned silence, watching his suspicions crumble into irrelevance. The infrastructure matches signatures we've seen from Eastern European intelligence units, Zara reported. There's evidence of inside access, possibly a compromised employee or long-term surveillance penetration. I've locked down data exfiltration points, but a full impact report will need forensic review. Vale's expression tightened as he processed the implications. Your analysis aligns with intel from other breach sites. This wasn't a one-off, it's part of a coordinated attack on multiple classified installations. What you did here may have just shut down a major security threat. Dr. Cross looked between them, finally understanding that this situation went far beyond what anyone had imagined. And Morrison, now silent, understood something else entirely. His paranoia had blinded him to a truth more dangerous and more real than he'd ever guessed. Cross, who had been watching this exchange with fascination, finally voiced the question that Morrison was too stunned to ask. Agent Phoenix? Zara, what's your real name? What's your actual background? Vale answered before Zara could respond, his tone carrying the formal authority of someone delivering classified information under emergency protocols. This is Agent Rebecca Phoenix, formerly the lead cyber warfare specialist for Ghost Protocol, the most classified digital defense unit in American intelligence. She was declared killed in action 3 years ago after uncovering a major penetration of government systems by hostile intelligence services. The revelation sent shockwaves through the security office, recontextualizing every interaction and assumption from the previous 18 months. Morrison's harassment of a supposed janitor had actually been persecution of one of the most highly trained intelligence operatives in government service. His paranoid suspicions about her background had been technically correct, but completely wrong about their implications. Agent Phoenix's civilian cover was established after she testified in classified proceedings that led to the arrest of multiple foreign intelligence operatives, Vale continued. Her identity was protected at the highest levels of government, because her knowledge of compromised systems made her a target for retaliation. Morrison found his voice, though it came out as little more than a whisper. She's been here for 18 months. Working as a janitor, I've been treating her like a security threat. Vale's expression suggested he was aware of Morrison's behavior and found it professionally unacceptable. Mr. Morrison, your handling of this facility's security protocols will be reviewed by federal investigators. Agent Phoenix's presence here was not coincidental. Intelligence indicated that Nexus Research Facility was likely to be targeted for cyber attack, and she was positioned to provide emergency response capabilities. The pieces of an elaborate operation were falling into place, revealing layers of planning and coordination that extended far beyond Morrison's understanding. Zara hadn't been hiding at the facility to escape her past. She'd been placed there as part of an ongoing mission to protect classified assets from exactly the kind of attack they just experienced. The barcode tattoo, Dr. Cross said suddenly, understanding dawning in her voice. It's not decorative art. It's some kind of identification system. Vale nodded grimly. Level 9 clearance, the highest classification in government service. Agent Phoenix has access to systems that most cabinet members don't know exist. Mr. Morrison's scanner readings should have triggered immediate notification to federal security agencies. Morrison's legs gave out, forcing him to sit heavily in his chair as the full scope of his mistakes became clear. He'd spent months harassing someone whose security clearance exceeded his own by orders of magnitude, someone whose expertise could have prevented the very security breaches he'd been supposedly protecting against. The cyber attack alarm systems fell silent as Zara completed her countermeasures, the facility's normal lighting returning as compromised systems were secured and restored to full operation. She stood from the computer terminal with the quiet Satisfaction of someone who'd completed a difficult but successful mission. Her civilian cover now permanently blown, but her operational objectives achieved. "Agent Vale," she said, her voice carrying the formal tone of someone delivering an after-action report. "The immediate threat has been neutralized. The attackers have been expelled from all classified systems, and their command infrastructure has been compromised through the countermeasures I've implemented. However, this facility's security protocols require comprehensive review to prevent future penetrations." Vale's expression suggested he agreed with this assessment. "Agent Phoenix, your reactivation is authorized under emergency protocols. Your civilian cover is terminated as of this moment, and you're reinstated to full operational status with commendation for exceptional service under difficult circumstances." Morrison watched this exchange with the growing realization that his career was effectively over. His persecution of a federal agent, his interference with emergency response operations, and his general incompetence in handling the crisis would generate investigations that would destroy any chance of continued government employment. The political connections that had secured his position would be liabilities rather than assets once news of his failures reached higher levels of authority. The facility staff began arriving as word spread about the successful resolution of the cyber attack, but their attention quickly focused on the transformed identity of someone they'd known as a quiet janitor. Tommy Reeves appeared in the security office doorway with an expression of stunned recognition, followed by other members of the night shift cleaning crew who stared at Zara as if seeing her for the first time. "Agent Phoenix," Tommy said slowly, testing the unfamiliar title. "All this time you were protecting us, and we never knew." Zara's smile carried genuine warmth as she looked at the people who'd shown her kindness during the darkest period of her undercover assignment. "You treated me with respect when you thought I was just another janitor, Tommy. That says more about your character than any revelation about mine." Agent Vale was already coordinating with his tactical team to secure the facility and begin the comprehensive investigation that would follow any major security breach. Morrison would face questioning about his handling of security protocols, his treatment of facility personnel, and his interference with federal emergency response operations. The political connections that had protected him in the past would be powerless against charges of incompetence that had potentially compromised national security. As the immediate crisis response wound down, Dr. Cross approached Zara with the kind of professional curiosity that had characterized their earlier conversations. "All those technical questions you asked, all those insights about our research projects, you weren't learning from us. You were assessing our security vulnerabilities." Zara nodded with the confirmation of someone whose cover story was no longer necessary. "This facility has been under surveillance by hostile intelligence services for months. My assignment was to monitor threats while maintaining civilian cover. The cyber attack forced me to reveal capabilities I'd hoped to keep hidden, but the mission parameters required protection of classified assets above maintenance of cover identity. The transformation was complete." Zara Blackwood, the quiet night shift janitor, had ceased to exist. In her place stood Agent Rebecca Phoenix, a federal cyber warfare specialist whose expertise had just prevented a major breach of national security. Morrison's paranoid harassment had ended with the exposure of his own incompetence and the revelation that his primary target was actually one of the most highly trained intelligence operatives in government service. The facility hummed with renewed activity as federal investigators began their work, but the crisis was over. Agent Phoenix had emerged from 3 years of civilian cover to fulfill the mission that had defined her entire adult life, protecting American interests from threats that most people would never see coming. Morrison's persecution had backfired in ways he could never have imagined, transforming his victim into his superior and revealing the full scope of his own professional failures. 3 weeks after the cyber attack, Agent Vale returned to Nexus Research Facility with an offer that would have transformed Rebecca Phoenix's life in ways she'd once dreamed about during the darkest moments of her civilian cover. The offer came in an envelope bearing the seal of the Director of National Intelligence, delivered personally in a conference room that still smelled faintly of the industrial disinfectant she'd used to clean it countless times as Zara Blackwood. "Agent Phoenix," Vale began, his tone carrying the weight of official business conducted at the highest levels of government. "Your actions during the facility breach have been reviewed by multiple intelligence agencies. The countermeasures you implemented not only prevented significant data theft, but provided actionable intelligence that led to the disruption of a coordinated attack against 12 classified facilities across the country. The commendations were impressive by any standard. Presidential recognition for exceptional service. Promotion to senior intelligence analyst with oversight of national cyber defense initiatives. Command of a new task force dedicated to preventing the kind of coordinated attacks that had targeted Nexus. Assignment to facilities where her expertise would be valued rather than hidden, where her recommendations would carry the weight of official authority rather than being dismissed as the observations of a maintenance worker." Rebecca listened to the offer with the professional attention it deserved, but her response surprised Vale in ways that suggested he'd misunderstood something fundamental about what she'd learned during her 3 years of civilian cover. The woman who'd emerged from hiding wasn't the same person who disappeared after Agent Codebreaker's betrayal. 18 months of invisibility had taught her lessons about purpose and fulfillment that couldn't be found in official recognition or bureaucratic authority. "Agent Vale," she said quietly, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had commanded respect during the crisis, but now directed toward a different kind of decision. "I appreciate the recognition and the opportunities you're offering. But I've learned something during my time here that changes how I think about service and effectiveness." Vale's expression reflected the confusion of someone whose carefully prepared presentation had taken an unexpected turn. The offer he'd delivered represented everything that intelligence operatives typically sought: official vindication, career advancement, and the kind of high-level assignments that validated years of sacrifice and dedication. Rebecca's hesitation suggested she was considering factors that went beyond conventional measures of professional success. "I understand that your civilian cover was challenging," Vale continued, apparently interpreting her response as negotiation rather than genuine uncertainty. "The psychological isolation, the daily humiliations, the necessity of hiding your capabilities from people who couldn't appreciate them. We're prepared to ensure that you never face those circumstances again." But Rebecca had moved beyond seeing her time as Zara Blackwood as something to be escaped or forgotten. The experience had connected her with people whose lives were shaped by very different struggles than those faced by intelligence operatives with classified clearances and government authority. Tommy Reeves working 2 jobs to support his disabled wife's medical expenses. Maria Santos sending money to grandchildren in another state while cleaning offices for people who barely acknowledged her existence. Frank Chun balancing night shift maintenance with day shift auto repair because neither job paid enough to support his family alone. "The people I worked with here face threats every day that don't appear in intelligence briefings," Rebecca said, her words chosen with the precision of someone who'd spent weeks thinking about this conversation. "Economic insecurity, workplace harassment, healthcare crises, educational barriers that limit their children's opportunities. They showed me kindness and respect when they thought I was just another janitor struggling to make ends meet." Dr. Cross had become an unexpected ally during the weeks following the crisis, using her position as a senior researcher to advocate for reforms in facility management and security protocols. Her conversations with Rebecca had explored the intersection between technical expertise and human dignity, questioning systems that valued credentials and clearances over actual competence and character. "What Morrison did to you and the other maintenance staff was systemic," Abuse enabled by institutional hierarchies that treat people as disposable. Cross had observed during one of their discussions. Your expertise was always there, but the system couldn't recognize it because it came packaged in coveralls instead of a security clearance. How many other people have valuable insights that get ignored because they don't fit traditional profiles of authority? The question had resonated with Rebecca because it connected her personal experience to broader patterns of institutional blindness that she'd observed throughout her intelligence career. Agencies that dismissed warnings from field operatives because they contradicted assessments made by senior officials in Washington. Technical specialists whose recommendations were ignored because they lacked political connections or bureaucratic sophistication. Foreign sources whose intelligence was devalued because they didn't fit stereotypical profiles of reliable informants. Morrison's career had ended with the efficiency typical of government responses to public embarrassment. His security clearance was revoked, his employment terminated, and his behavior during the crisis documented in reports that would prevent him from obtaining similar positions in the future. The political connections that had secured his appointment became liabilities. Once his incompetence was exposed at levels where national security implications couldn't be ignored or covered up. But Rebecca found no satisfaction in Morrison's downfall because it failed to address the systemic problems that had enabled his abuse of authority. Other facilities had other Morrisons, people whose prejudices and insecurities were channeled into harassment of those they perceived as beneath them. The intelligence community remained structured around hierarchies that confused credentials with competence, authority with effectiveness, and classification levels with actual expertise. Agent Vale, Rebecca continued, her decision crystallizing as she spoke. I'm declining the reinstatement and the new assignments. I want to try something different, something that addresses the problems I've seen from both sides of the classification divide. Vale's reaction suggested he'd encountered many unexpected responses during his career, but this one challenged assumptions he'd thought were fundamental to intelligence work. Agent Phoenix, with respect, you've dedicated your entire adult life to protecting national security. The skills you've developed, the experience you've gained, the sacrifices you've made, they're too valuable to waste on civilian pursuits. The word waste revealed the gap between Vale's perspective and the understanding Rebecca had developed during her time in civilian cover. Her skills weren't being wasted when she'd helped Tommy Reeves troubleshoot computer problems that were affecting his wife's medical equipment. Her experience wasn't irrelevant when she'd shown Frank Chun how to optimize inventory systems at his auto repair shop. Her knowledge wasn't diminished when she'd assisted Dr. Cross with security assessments that protected research projects from potential compromise. I've been thinking about starting a consulting firm, Rebecca explained, her voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone who'd found a purpose that combined professional expertise with personal fulfillment. Cybersecurity services for organizations that can't afford the kind of comprehensive protection that government facilities take for granted. Small businesses, nonprofits, educational institutions, community organizations that handle sensitive information but lack the resources for professional security assessment. The concept represented a different model of service, one that valued accessibility and practical effectiveness over classification levels and bureaucratic prestige. Rebecca had observed how many civilian organizations operated with security vulnerabilities that could be addressed through relatively simple measures if they had access to expertise that understood both technical solutions and operational constraints. There's also an educational component, she continued, warming to a vision that had developed during countless conversations with facility staff who'd shown genuine curiosity about cybersecurity principles. Training programs for people who want to develop technical skills but don't fit traditional educational models. Evening classes for working adults, practical workshops for small business owners, mentorship programs for students from backgrounds that aren't typically represented in cybersecurity careers. Vale listened with the expression of someone trying to understand a foreign language. The career path Rebecca was describing would mean abandoning the classified world that had defined her identity for over a decade, trading influence over national policy for impact on individual lives, choosing local community engagement over global strategic operations. "Agent Phoenix," he said carefully, "you're talking about walking away from a career that most intelligence professionals would consider the pinnacle of public service. Your expertise could influence policies that affect millions of people. Your knowledge could prevent attacks that would cause massive economic and social disruption." Rebecca understood the weight of Vale's argument because she'd made similar calculations throughout her intelligence career. The utilitarian logic that justified personal sacrifice for broader impact. The conviction that protecting abstract national interests was more important than addressing concrete individual needs. The belief that classified work was inherently more valuable than civilian contributions. But her experience as Zara Blackwood had revealed flaws in this framework that she couldn't ignore. National security was ultimately about protecting the welfare and freedom of individual citizens, but intelligence agencies often lost sight of this connection by focusing exclusively on high-level threats, while ignoring the daily vulnerabilities that affected ordinary people's lives. "Agent Vale," she replied, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who'd found clarity through experience rather than theory. "The most sophisticated cyber attack in the world is useless if it can't exploit basic security weaknesses at the local level. The threats that keep people awake at night aren't usually foreign intelligence services or terrorist organizations. They're identity theft, financial fraud, privacy violations, and economic manipulation by people who understand that individual vulnerability aggregates into systemic weakness." The decision reflected a fundamental shift in how Rebecca understood effectiveness and impact. Agent Phoenix had operated at levels where success was measured in classified metrics that could never be publicly acknowledged. The work was important, but the satisfaction came primarily from professional accomplishment rather than visible improvement in people's lives. Dr. Cross had offered to serve as an initial client and advisor for Rebecca's consulting venture, providing both practical support and intellectual legitimacy that would help establish credibility with other potential clients. Her endorsement carried weight in academic and research communities that valued technical competence over governmental authority. "You have knowledge that could transform how civilian organizations approach cybersecurity," Cross had argued during their planning conversations. "Most small businesses and community groups operate with security practices that were obsolete 10 years ago, not because they don't care about protection, but because they don't have access to current expertise." Tommy Reeves had expressed interest in serving as a client relations coordinator, using his decades of facility management experience to help translate technical recommendations into practical implementations that worked within organizational constraints and budget limitations. His enthusiasm for the project reflected genuine appreciation for someone who'd treated him with respect during circumstances when most people would have focused exclusively on their own survival. The transition from Agent Phoenix to Rebecca Chun, she'd chosen a new civilian name that honored her commitment to a different kind of service, represented more than career change. It was a fundamental reimagining of how expertise could be deployed to serve communities that were typically excluded from high-level protection and support. The consulting firm's first clients were organizations that had been touched by Rebecca's story through media coverage of the Nexus incident, a community healthcare clinic that needed to protect patient records from increasingly sophisticated attempts at medical identity theft, a small-town bank whose customers were being targeted by fraud schemes had exploited their lack of familiarity with digital security practices, a nonprofit legal aid organization whose clients' confidential information was vulnerable to surveillance by people with resources and motivation to undermine their cases. Each engagement required Rebecca to translate skills developed for classified government operations into solutions that worked for organizations with limited budgets and technical sophistication. The challenge was intellectually stimulating in ways that purely technical problems had never been, requiring creativity and adaptability that drew on emotional intelligence as much as cybersecurity expertise. Vail made one final attempt to change Rebecca's mind, emphasizing the national security implications of her decision and the irreplaceable nature of her knowledge and experience. But she'd moved beyond measuring her worth through official recognition or bureaucratic advancement. "Agent Vail," she said as their meeting concluded, "the most important lesson I learned during my civilian cover was that respect and effectiveness aren't determined by security clearances or organizational hierarchies. They're earned through competence, integrity, and genuine concern for other people's welfare. I can have more positive impact working with organizations that value those qualities than I could in systems that prioritize classification levels over character." The transformation was complete, but it wasn't the restoration that intelligence agencies typically offered to operatives emerging from deep cover. Rebecca had chosen evolution over return, growth over restoration, purpose over prestige. Agent Phoenix was officially retired, replaced by someone who'd learned that true security came from building trust and capability at the grassroots level rather than maintaining secrets and authority at the highest levels of government. 6 months later, Rebecca's consulting firm had grown to include former military personnel who shared her commitment to democratizing cybersecurity expertise, researchers who wanted their knowledge to have direct community impact, and business professionals who understood how to make technical solutions accessible to organizations with practical constraints. The work was challenging in ways that classified operations had never been, requiring constant adaptation to changing technologies and evolving threats while maintaining affordability and accessibility for clients who couldn't afford traditional cybersecurity services. But the satisfaction was immediate and tangible, measured in protected data, prevented fraud, and empowered communities rather than classified metrics that could never be publicly acknowledged. Morrison had disappeared into the obscurity that follows public professional failure, but his legacy lived on in conversations about workplace respect, institutional accountability, and the importance of recognizing competence regardless of its packaging. Rebecca occasionally thought about him, not with anger or satisfaction, but with something approaching understanding for someone whose insecurities had been channeled into cruelty by systems that rewarded authority over empathy. The barcode tattoo remained on her wrist, no longer scanning as level 9 clearance, but serving as a reminder of lessons learned about identity, service, and the difference between being valued and being valuable. The encrypted data it contained had been officially deactivated, but the experience it represented continued to inform her approach to problems that required both technical expertise and human understanding. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.